KMSU.
Dustin, Marvin Young here. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing today?
Good, man. Good. Can't complain.
Excellent. It's great to have you on. I'll introduce you to my co-host, Ton.
Hey there. How you doing?
Hi. Good. How are you?
I'm great. Glad to have you on the line. If you're ready to go, we'll get started here.
Sure.
Excellent. Well, I guess the first initial question we got to ask, what made you decide to get into rap music in the beginning?
Oh boy. That's interesting. I grew up in Hollis, Queens, and I was in school and doing the regular stuff that 10, 11-year-old kids do, and I wasn't that much into sports. And there was, kids would be into graffiti, and some would be into harder stuff than that, and I wasn't into that either. And then I discovered hip-hop, and my friend Jeffrey Taylor in his basement. And I liked the idea of being able to express yourself. So I started rhyming around the age of 11, and I was in a couple of crews, and yeah, it just kept developing, and I stuck at it. It was like my strongest hobby.
And what made you add the MC to your name?
Well, it's Master of Ceremony, so you want to distinguish yourself. So my last name, and ironically, I was always the youngest one around. So I'm 11, 12, and the other kids are 15, 17, some 18, and I'm hanging with them in terms of being able to spit and whatever. But the irony of it was, at that point, I couldn't remember my rhymes, so I used to run around with a bag full of sheets of rhymes, and I pull them out and read them, actually, at the parties. But I was like 11, 12, so I don't think that was a bad thing.
Yeah, I imagine growing up around that time, it was really kind of the start of things. You mentioned being in crews and, having graffiti artists and the DJs and the MCs. I mean, that must have been a pretty, great place to grow up and kind of get into that sort of genre.
It's extremely underground. Like, there's no sampling, there's no looping, there's none of that technology. So it's like, what two records do you have? Are they in good condition? And we'll do it over. So every time you practice, you're making the records worse. You're making the parts at the beginning of the breaks, you could almost not hear them with the noise and the fizz. Then when it got to the middle and the end of the break, you could hear it more because those were the areas that weren't being scratched back and forth as much.
Sure. Well, we know that you hooked up with Tone-Lōc pretty early on in your career. Was he just on the scene with the crews that you were with, or how did that come about?
No. All right. So those crews and everything, that was in New York, in Hollis, and then I came out to L.A. in 1985 to go to USC. So then in 1987, I signed with Delicious Vinyl right before my junior year, and then through Delicious Vinyl, they introduced me to Tone-Lōc, and that's when I started doing the writing for him.
Yeah, and obviously he had some huge success with the songs that you wrote. So is that kind of how you decided, maybe you could strike out on your own?
Oh, no, I was signed as an artist first. I'm sorry, I should have clarified that. I was signed as an artist first.
Oh, okay.
So I was making my own singles. I had I Let 'Em Know, My Name Is Young, and Know How. Those are the first, local singles, especially in L.A., and Know How even went national when Delicious got picked up by Island. So I was planning on being an artist, and I was actually approached with the opportunity to write for Tone-Lōc. And I wasn't even. It's funny because the purest background that I come from, it's like it was unheard of to have people write rhymes for other people. Even though in hindsight, I knew that Marley Marl and the Juice Crew that people would write for each other inside that crew. But it was something that was out of my experience for one rapper to write for another rapper, because that was why I got into it, that I could write something to express myself.
So with that being said, when something like that happens, when you end up writing for them and then those songs become, huge, 1 million, 2, 3 million sellers, does that bother you at all, or are you excited that it was you, knowing?
Well, it's a mixture of emotions. I could not have performed those songs because the beauty of those songs is Tone's voice. So if I rapped them, it wouldn't have the novelty that it has with Tone's voice. So me saying, I should have kept those lyrics for myself, that really never entered my mind. I wrote them pretty quickly. I wrote them specifically for him, and they worked for him. My concern was that nobody had heard of me at that point. So I was like, well, I can't really do the same style he does, and Bust the Move was a lot different than Wild Thing and Funky Cold Medina. And ironically, Principal's Office was supposed to be my first single, and then they turned around and said, okay, well, you need to do a dance one, like Tone did. But Bust the Move was still a lot different than Wild Thing and Funky Cold Medina. So I was I had fingers crossed because he had done $2 million on each of those singles, but before Bust the Move even really came out.
Yeah, but as you mentioned, when the Stone Cold Rhymin' album came out, it was pretty much the same thing. You were selling millions of copies, and it's kind of like growing up in New York and being in the thick of the scene there, and then you were really kind of in the thick of it again with hip hop when it was huge there in the late '80s.
Well, the ironic thing is I grew up in New York and I got really full in terms of the scene and learning how to write, but I wasn't a big in the scene because I was too young. I was, far away in Queens, wasn't driving, wasn't going to the clubs. I left New York at 17, so I never was old enough to get into nightclubs where I could even, show myself on the scene in New York. But I definitely got my skills from New York. By the time I got to L.A. and I was in college, then I was old enough to go to the clubs, and that was a fledgling rap scene. And I think, the shrewdest move that I made is that even though I came from New York, I claimed L.A. I'm like, look, I'm here. This is where I'm at. These are my friends. I rap, and I'm based in L.A. And they appreciated me a great deal for that because there were a lot of rappers that came from the East Coast, New York in particular, that would come to L.A. and be claiming New York all over the place, and L.A.'s trying to get a foothold. You know what I mean? So that was something I just felt instinctively. All the acts that I grew up with or came up with were all LA acts. So like I'm thanked on the NWA album, I'm thanked on the Eazy-E album. I knew all those guys. So this is like when the West Coast gangster rap is first starting, and I was right there with K-Day and all those other things.
Yeah, how did you feel about that, or could you sense that whole West Coast kind of gangster rap thing coming on? I mean, obviously, like the hip hop was more focused on like having fun or party scene and things like that. How was that shift?
Well, the shift was the shift was only in terms of what the major labels saw that they could sell. So, case in point, Bust the Move comes out. And it's up-tempo dance record with a female singing in the hook. I had more than one rapper that who was making a record at the time tell me that they were being pressured by their label to make an up-tempo record about partying with a female in the hook. Even though none of the other records on their album had anything to do with that, but they saw Bust the Move did well, so they wanted to try and capitalize on it. Now, I'm out at the same time that Tone-Lōc is out, at the same time Digital Underground is out, and then we got the East Coast with Poor Righteous Teachers and NWA in the West and Boogie Down Productions and De La Soul and just all these other groups, all these different, for lack of a better term, like mini genres within rap, all surviving, all going gold or platinum. Everybody's happy. Everybody's doing fine. Then it came where NWA does well, The Chronic does well, and then Snoop does well, and then everybody, all the majors get freaked out and say, okay, we have to put out gangster rap now. And it's one thing to say, okay, we're going to put it out with the inclusion of everyone else, but they did it to the exclusion of everyone else because they say, okay, if this is the thing that's selling, forget about every other type of rap music. We're just going to go with this. So I wasn't surprised by the existence of gangster rap. It was there from when I started. I was more surprised by the exclusive treatment of it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So like, I wouldn't want everybody to make party records with girls singing in the hook. I wouldn't, even though that's my thing. I wouldn't want the world to be that. But the major labels said, okay, we want the world to be whatever we think is going to sell, and that's the only thing we're going to put, resources and attention and publicity into. And that's what, that hurt a lot of us, actually. And it's not, because I'm not going to go turn around and, after making Bust the Move, turn around and make a gangster record just to say, oh, I'm doing what the labels want me to. I'm going to still make my music. So... it's one of those things you kind of run into if you want to keep your integrity.
Yeah, it does seem like some of the guys, I know MC Hammer and a couple other guys kind of tried to go that route, and it obviously didn't work out well.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. The kids know, the artists know, and the thing is, I had people in gangster rap that appreciated me the way I was. So, like, I get kidded a lot of times because Ice Cube on his solo album had the drive-by skit, and he had Bust the Move on the radio in the car when he's going to commit a drive-by. That's like unheard of. But that was like I consider a shout to me because of those days before Bust the Move came out. We were in the Casa and Skateland and World on Wheels, and you got to worry about what colors you're wearing. And dudes are coming back from prison saying, "Yo, they play your song in prison." That kind of thing. But no one would equate that with me because I'm like Best Friend Harry had a brother Larry. That's what they know me for. So I never felt any kind of insecurity being who I was because I still was able to get respect from gangster rappers in LA while I was still doing my clean stuff. It was when the labels just started pushing it, and then it just made it seem to the fans that what I was doing wasn't, what was, the flavor of the day.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what are your thoughts on the scene nowadays, I guess? You coming from kind of the old school mentality, and you mentioned you don't think it's right for people to write other people's rhymes, but that seems like it's going on a lot in the...
Oh, no, I mean, that was the... Dude, I'm talking 1988. No, that's
Sure.
totally changed. That's, by the time we got into the 90s, that was being done, and a lot of acts and people prospered from it. I'm just talking about literally me picking up a microphone in 1978, okay, doing house parties, writing my first rhymes, and watching the industry as it was, and then getting and starting my new record. That was my first exposure to it, but I obviously I was open to it because I did it, and then I've written for other people and the like. So it's not something that I held on to this long-standing thing. It was just that was my first exposure to it.
Sure. Well, it seems like that's kind of the norm now for the mainstream scene, but then on the flip side, it seems like the underground scene kind of going back to mixtapes and self-releasing albums, kind of like a dual sort of thing going on now.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing, is that you have big artists that'll make a mixtape, and then they don't know how to treat it in terms of the commercial aspect of it, or how to sell it, clear the samples. Do they acknowledge it at award shows? Do they try and put it on the radio? And it really is to just kind of create buzz. There's a ton of artists that were big on the underground and did their mixtapes, and then they go to make albums and they can't even finish an album because there's so much material out there that people have already consumed essentially for free that to try and create an album, that either includes the stuff from the mixtape or doesn't, or has the same style or doesn't. There's so many questions by the time these kids get to their first album that it kind of screws their career. And I've seen it happen to several. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I can't wait till this record comes out, and either it never comes out or it comes out and it's really mediocre because they've been, kind of either overwhelmed by the whole process, or the mixtape has kind of drained their, their creativity, or they're accustomed to making mixtapes and they can't step the game up to become a real, songwriter or music creator. And all that shows. If kids are paying money, and you're going up against people that are at record labels, selling a bunch of units, it shows if you have a less than a competent product.
Now, also, you've done quite a bit of acting over the years. How did you get into acting? How did that happen?
Well, I mean, it's something where I had opportunities to do it, had friends that were doing it. Things would come across, my desk where they'd want me to play myself, and then I'd know somebody who was making a movie, and they want me to come in and play a role, or somebody was a fan of the music, and they said, oh, it would be good for you to do a cameo, and I've kind of, parlayed that, and then the last thing that I did, the major thing that I did was Up in the Air, and from that, I've actually gotten into writing, and, well, I've been into writing the whole time, but I've directed my first feature film that I'm about to take to market, so it's something where that's been a growing process and a labor of love for me.
Yeah, and I know you're still making music, performing. You mentioned acting. Now you're directing, kind of pulling off all sorts of things here at the same time. That's awesome.
Well, and it's the music business is not what it used to be. So I've seen my royalties go down. A lot of people have seen royalties go down. The shows are coming, but they're not as many as they used to be, or at least they're haphazard. Put it like that. They're not as regular as they used to be. I mean, there are definitely opportunities that pop up. So I wanted to find something that I could do on a day-to-day basis to use my creativity, because there are tons of records out there. I think the statistic from 2013, it's either 2012 or 2013, that there were 200,000 albums created, and of that 200,000, only 6,000 sold over 1,000 copies, and that includes downloading. That's
Wow.
Physical and downloading. So if you're talking about 97% of the records not even selling 1,000 copies, and you're trying to get back in, that's tough. That's because the fans you had at 16 are now close to 40.
Sure.
That's
sure.
tough. So I look at it like, okay, let me kind of get in where I fit in. I'll put music into my films. I'll do a lot of licensing on that side. If a music opportunity comes up and it makes sense, then I'll dive into it and I'll do it. But other than that, I'm not going to try and bang my head against the wall, because I've seen major labels put mid six figures into an artist and not see that come back. and that's a scary place to be if you're putting real money into music and you're not able to see it, generate the revenue that you thought it would.
Right. Well, you mentioned the film that you're working on. Do you have anything else coming up or any projects you want to mention?
Well, I mean, the name of the film is called Justice Served, and the biggest actor we have in there is Lance Henriksen, who was in Alien, and we have Gail O'Grady, and an actor named Lachlan Monroe, myself, an actress named Denise Lawton. Several good actors, film actors, and we made a pretty solid film. And I'm actually going to be screening it, in the next coming weeks and months, and looking to hook up with a distributor soon after that. So that's been most of my time that I've been spending doing. A couple performances here and there. People can look around and see where I'm playing. So just trying to keep it moving, man. Just trying to keep being active and keep being productive.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you taking some time out with us. Thanks so much for being on with us today.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a good one.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.